Hey there. Tonight, we're not just reading a story, we're stepping through a shimmering veil of time, plunging headfirst into one of history's most captivating and enigmatic periods. The mysterious, mist-shrouded world of Dark Age Britain, the very era that whispered to the bards and gave birth to the legend of King Arthur. So, go ahead, nestle deeper under your favorite blanket, perhaps even light a soft, flickering candle if the mood strikes you, and allow the ancient, rhythmic pulse of this tale to carry you effortlessly back through the centuries. I promise you, by the time our shared journey concludes, you won't just know about this fascinating epic. You'll feel its challenges, its raw beauty, and its quiet wonders in a whole new, profound light. Congratulations! You've just experienced a jolt of temporal displacement, waking up quite abruptly in 5th century Britain, specifically around the year 450 AD. The air, surprisingly, feels different. It's crisp, almost raw, carrying a wildness you've never encountered in your own time, untainted by the clamor of modern industry. A cool, tenacious morning mist still clings stubbornly just above the dew-kissed ground, weaving through the nascent light. From somewhere unseen, the comforting, earthy scent of wood smoke drifts lazily through the dawn, a primal perfume hinting at human presence and the warmth of hearth fires. The good news, if you can call it that, is that you've arrived at a truly pivotal moment, a time of astonishing, transformative change and untamed possibilities, where the old world is crumbling and a new one struggles to be born. The bad news? Well, let's just say this particular slice of British history isn't exactly remembered for its serene tranquility. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You find yourself perched rather precariously on a grassy hilltop, the long, damp blades tickling your hands as you brace yourself. Below, nestled snugly in a shallow, verdant valley, lies a small, seemingly forgotten village. Its houses, with their distinctive rounded or rectangular shapes and humble thatched roofs, cluster together like a scattered handful of mushrooms that have sprouted overnight after a refreshing rain. Thin, ethereal trails of smoke curl gracefully upwards from central openings in their roofs, mingling with the lingering morning mist, a visible sign of life stirring within. This, you quickly realize, is Britain, just as the mighty Roman legions, the very backbone of imperial order, have finally, irrevocably departed these shores. They've left behind not a vacuum, but a land in profound, often violent transition. For nearly 400 long, transformative years, Britain had been an integral, if somewhat distant part of the colossal Roman Empire. The Romans, you remember from your history books, were those formidable people in their gleaming, segmented armor who engineered incredibly straight roads that crisscrossed the land, erected monumental stone buildings, and constructed grand public bathhouses where they delighted in soaking away their cares and, no doubt, indulging in lively gossip. They had brought with them an unprecedented level of order, a plethora of luxury goods from across the vast empire, and a sophisticated way of life that, for generations, many of Britain's inhabitants had grown remarkably accustomed to, perhaps even dependent upon. But now, they are utterly, unequivocally gone. Their legions, once a symbol of unshakable authority, were recalled to Rome, summoned to deal with mounting troubles and threats much closer to home, leaving Britain to fend for itself. It happened about 40 years ago. A voice, surprisingly close, murmurs beside you, startling you out of your reverie. You turn sharply to find an old man standing there. His face a roadmap of deep wrinkles etched by sun, wind, and countless seasons. Despite the weathered lines, his eyes hold a remarkable kindness, a deep, ancient wisdom. He leans heavily on a stout, gnarled wooden staff, its tip worn smooth from years of use, and gazes down at the village with a profound, almost wistful expression. I was just a boy then, a frightened lad, when the last of the Roman soldiers boarded their ships, their polished armor glinting in the pale sunlight of a final farewell. He pauses, a faraway look in his eyes. Some say Emperor Honorius himself sent a letter, a stark decree telling us Britons to look to our own defense, to stand on our own feet. Others whisper it was that ambitious General Constantine, who, in his quest for power, simply took our soldiers away for his own distant wars across the continent, leaving us exposed. He shrugs, a gesture of ancient resignation. Either way, they left us. The old man sweeps an arm in a broad, encompassing gesture toward the valley below. The good news is that we're still here, still clinging to this land, still living, still coaxing food from the earth and raising our children under these very skies. The bad news, his voice drops, a hint of steel entering its gentle timbre, is that without the Roman legions, without their discipline and their formidable might, others have come. Others who look upon our fertile lands with covetous eyes, and they want them. From your vantage point high on the hilltop, you can now discern how the landscape, though seemingly wild, is meticulously divided into small, irregular fields, separated by low, rough-hewn stone walls, a testament to generations of labor. Fluffy white sheep, their fleeces thick with wool, graze peacefully on the hillsides, their soft bleats carrying faintly on the morning breeze. In some of the fields below, you notice small groups of people already at work, their forms bent over the soil, diligently toiling the land with simple, almost primitive tools. Wooden hoes, rudimentary plows, and hand sickles. It's a scene that, at first glance, appears utterly tranquil, idyllic even. Yet there's an almost imperceptible tension woven into the very fabric of the air, a subtle vibration that hums beneath the surface, much like the heavy, electric stillness that precedes a brewing storm. Who am I, you ask? The old man lets out a soft, dry chuckle, a sound like pebbles tumbling down a slope when you pose the question. Why, I'm just Caddick. Once, long ago, I was a stonemason, a skilled craftsman who labored on the grand Roman buildings in the fine town of Corinium, back when those magnificent structures were still new and proud. Now, I'm simply an old man who remembers the old days, who carries their echoes in his heart and mind. Caddick, with a welcoming nod, invites you to descend with him into the village, a silent invitation to share his world. As you begin the gentle, winding slope downwards, the path worn smooth by countless footsteps, he continues to speak, his voice a quiet murmur, explaining how life has profoundly transformed, how it has both diminished and adapted since the Romans packed up their standards and sailed away. We still make use of some of their old buildings, of course, he says, gesturing to a partially ruined stone wall nearby, repurposed as a field boundary. Why build new when perfectly good walls, built with such Roman strength, still stand ready, offering shelter or foundation? But many of the finer things, the luxuries we once took for granted, are now much harder to come by. He sighs, a sound of gentle regret. The exquisite pottery from Gaul, its surfaces smooth and painted, the rich olive oil from distant Hispania, brought in vast amphorae, the delicate, fine glass vessels that shimmered with light. Those trading ships, laden with wonders, they simply don't come as often as they once did. The sea routes are less safe, the markets less certain, and the intricate web of Roman commerce has largely unraveled. As you finally enter the village, stepping off the worn track onto packed earth, you immediately notice how strikingly different it is from the meticulously planned Roman towns that once dominated Britain's landscape. Gone are the straight, geometrically precise streets, laid out in efficient grids, so characteristic of Roman urban planning. Gone, too, are the imposing stone buildings with their distinctive red-tiled roofs, the grand forums where public life unfolded, and the luxurious bathhouses that served as centers for hygiene and social interaction. Instead, this village feels far more organic, almost grown from the earth itself. Its round or rectangular houses arranged in what appears to be natural family groupings, their layouts dictated by kinship and terrain rather than imperial decree. Most of these homes, you observe, are simple affairs, constructed with practical efficiency. They feature sturdy wooden frames, their walls skillfully covered with wattle and daub, that ingenious ancient technique of weaving pliable sticks or branches together, then plastering them liberally with a robust mixture of mud, straw, and, yes, animal dung for binding and insulation. The roofs are expertly thatched with thick layers of reeds or straw, providing excellent insulation against both rain and cold. In the very center of each roof, a carefully designed opening allows the smoke from the central hearth within to escape, a perpetually smoldering chimney that perfumes the entire village. Inside these homes, you quickly realize there are no separate rooms, no intricate divisions like those found in modern houses. Instead, each house is essentially one large, open space, a communal hub where the entire family lives, cooks their meals over the open fire, shares their meager provisions, and sleeps together, drawing warmth from the hearth and comfort from each other's presence. "Come, come!" Caddick exclaims, his voice regaining some of its earlier cheer, as he beckons you warmly toward one of the larger houses situated near the heart of the village. "Let's see if Branwen, bless her diligent hands, has any of her morning bread left to share. Her loaves are a blessing on any day." You follow him through the low doorway, ducking slightly to clear the frame. Inside, the air immediately envelops you in a comforting embrace of warmth, thick and fragrant with the irresistible, yeasty smell of freshly baking bread. The floor is simply packed earth, tamped smooth and hard by generations of footsteps. In the very center of the room, a small, vibrant fire burns merrily in a stone-lined pit, its flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. Smoke, a thin, lazy plume, rises unhurriedly towards the aforementioned hole in the thatched roof, efficiently venting the hearth. Around the sturdy, whitewashed walls, simple wooden benches are arranged, offering places for sitting and working, alongside practical shelves holding an assortment of pottery containers, wooden bowls, and various household tools, each crafted for a specific purpose. A woman, her hair a beautiful tapestry of gray woven into a long, intricate braid that hangs down her back, looks up from where she is carefully tending the fire, her hands stained with flour. "This," Caddick informs you with a respectful nod, "is Branwen, the village's most respected healer and midwife. Her wisdom sought for everything from mending bones to easing childbirth." Her eyes, crinkling at the corners with a genuine and open welcome, light up as she sees Caddick, and she gestures for both of you to sit on the benches nearest the life-giving warmth of the fire. "Breaking your fast, are you, Caddick?" she asks, her voice soft but clear, as she deftly pulls a flat, rustic loaf from the very edge of the embers, its crust slightly charred and wonderfully fragrant. Without hesitation, she breaks it into generous pieces, handing you a warm, fragrant chunk. It's coarser, you discover, than the refined white bread you might be accustomed to in your own time, made from hardy barley rather than delicate wheat. But it is utterly delicious all the same, especially when Branwen, with a small knowing smile, drizzles it with a glistening thread of sweet, golden honey from a small utilitarian pottery jar. "Our visitor," Caddick explains to Branwen, gesturing towards you, "has come from a place far away, a very distant shore indeed." Branwen simply nods, her expression unperturbed, as if the arrival of strangers from distant lands, or perhaps even distant times, isn't an entirely unusual occurrence in this changeable world. Then you'll be wanting to know how we live here, won't you? She says, settling gracefully beside you on the bench, her gaze direct and unflinching. It's a simple life, perhaps, but a good one. A true life, rooted in the earth. We grow our barley and our vegetables in the fields outside, tending them with care. We raise our sheep, their wool for warmth and their meat for sustenance, and we keep some sturdy cattle for milk and labor. The wild forest, a generous provider, gives us game to hunt, honey from the wild bees, and a bounty of berries and nuts in their proper seasons. You notice that Branwen wears a simple, practical woolen dress, dyed a deep, earthy blue, its color derived from natural plant pigments. A heavy, practical cloak is pinned at her shoulder with a robust bronze brooch, a piece of adornment that doubles as a fastener. Around her neck, however, hangs something more distinctive, a simple leather cord from which dangles a small, unadorned cross clear, undeniable evidence that Christianity, sown by Roman hands, has indeed taken root and begun to flourish in Britain, even amidst the crumbling of the Roman world. The old ways and the new, Branwen observes softly, her gaze following yours to her cross. They flow together here, like streams joining a mighty river. Some indeed follow the Christ, finding solace and truth in his teachings. Some still honor the old gods of the forests, the hills, and the bubbling streams, the ancient deities of our ancestors. And many, perhaps most, do a bit of both, she adds with a wry, knowing smile. Just to be safe, you understand. To cover all our bases, as it were. As you continue to eat your bread, savoring its simple goodness, more villagers begin to drop by, drawn by curiosity about the newcomer. They are dressed similarly to Branwen, their clothing practical and sturdy. The men wear simple tunics and breeches, cut for movement and utility. The women wear long, flowing dresses, often dyed with natural colors extracted from local plants, soft blues from woad, earthy greens from nettles, sunny yellows from weld, and deep reds from madder root. Their clothes are almost exclusively made of resilient wool or rough linen, spun and woven by hand. Most wear practical leather shoes or boots, crafted for the rugged terrain. Though tonight, settle in, for we are not merely recounting history, but stepping into a truly captivating epoch, the enigmatic Dark Age Britain, a land shrouded in mist and legend, where the echoes of King Arthur's time first began to reverberate. Draw your blankets closer, perhaps ignite a flickering candle, and allow the gentle cadence of this tale to transport you across the centuries. I assure you, by the close of our shared journey, the trials and triumphs of this fascinating era will shine in an entirely new, deeply human light. Congratulations, you have just awoken in the heart of 5th century Britain, approximately the year 450 AD. The air here is profoundly different, crisp, untamed, almost biting, yet infused with an invigorating wildness. A cool morning mist, ethereal and damp, hovers just inches above the dew-kissed ground, while the earthy, comforting scent of wood smoke, mingled with damp soil and growing things, drifts lazily on the breeze. You are fortunate, for you've arrived at a moment of extraordinary flux and boundless, if perilous, possibilities. The less favorable news? Well, let's just say this particular slice of British history is far from a tranquil idyll. You find yourself poised on a gentle, grassy hilltop, the lush green expanse sloping gracefully before you. Below, nestled snugly within the embrace of a shallow valley, lies a small village. Its thatched roof houses huddle together, a close-knit cluster of earthy dwellings, much like a patch of sturdy mushrooms emerging after a benevolent spring rain. From the central smoke holes of these humble abodes, Thin, sinuous trails of smoke ascend, mingling with the lingering mist to paint faint, ephemeral patterns against the lightening sky. This, you realize, is Britain precisely as the mighty Roman legions have bid farewell to these shores, leaving behind a land caught in the precarious balance of transition. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain had been an integral, albeit distant, province of the colossal Roman Empire. The Romans, those formidable individuals clad in gleaming armor, celebrated for their engineering marvels like arrow-straight roads, intricate aqueducts, and grand public baths where they would gather to soak away the day's grime and exchange the latest gossip, had bestowed upon this island a tangible sense of order, a steady flow of luxury goods, and a structured way of life that many had grown profoundly accustomed to, even dependent upon. But now, with an almost sudden finality, they are gone. Their legions, the very backbone of Roman authority, had been recalled to Rome, summoned to quell escalating troubles closer to the imperial heartland. It happened about 40 years ago. A voice, surprisingly close and laden with the weight of memory, observes beside you. You turn, startled, to find an old man. His face is a road map of wrinkles, etched deep by sun and wind, but his eyes, though ancient, hold a profound kindness. He leans heavily upon a gnarled wooden staff, its surface polished smooth by decades of use, and gazes contemplatively at the village below, as if seeing not just the present, but all the layers of history beneath it. I was just a boy when the last Roman soldiers boarded their ships, he recounts, his voice a low rumble. Some whisper that Emperor Honorius himself sent a letter, a curt dismissal, telling us Britons to see to our own defense. Others claim it was that ambitious General Constantine who stripped our land of its soldiers for his own endless wars on the continent. Either way, they abandoned us. The old man makes a sweeping, almost elegiac gesture toward the valley, encompassing the entire landscape. The good news, he continues, a faint, resilient smile touching his lips, is that we are still here, still living, still tending our fields, still raising our children. Life, stubborn and enduring, goes on. His smile fades, replaced by a shadow of concern. The bad news is that without the Roman legions to guard us, others have come. Others who look upon our fertile lands with covetous eyes and are not afraid to take what they want by force. From this vantage point on the hilltop, you can clearly discern how the landscape is meticulously divided into small, irregular fields, delineated by low, dry stone walls. Sheep, their fleeces thick and off-white against the vibrant green, graze placidly on the hillsides, their soft bleating carried on the morning breeze. In some of the fields below, you notice figures stooped over, diligently working the land with simple, almost archaic tools. Wooden plows, crude hoes, and handheld sickles. It is a scene of pastoral tranquility, yet an almost palpable tension permeates the air. A subtle unease, like the hushed silence that precedes a violent summer storm. Who am I? The old man chuckles, a dry, raspy sound, when you voice your question. I'm just Caddick. Once I was a stonemason, working with Roman mortar and tools on the grand buildings in the town of Corinium, back when those were being built. Now, he shrugs, a gesture of resignation. I'm just an old man who remembers the way things used to be. Caddick extends an unspoken invitation, and you find yourself falling into step beside him as he begins the gentle descent toward the village. As you walk down the gradual slope, he speaks, his voice a quiet narrative recounting the profound shifts in daily life since the Romans' departure. We still make use of some of their old buildings, of course, he explains, gesturing toward a distant, crumbling stone structure. Why labor to build anew when perfectly sturdy walls already stand ready? But many of the finer things, the luxuries, are now far harder to come by. The delicate pottery from Gaul, the rich olive oil from Hispania, the exquisite glass vessels, those trading ships, once a common sight in our harbors, now venture here but rarely. As you step across the invisible threshold into the village proper, you are immediately struck by how profoundly different it is from the Roman towns that once asserted their organized dominance across Britain. Gone are the rigidly straight streets, meticulously laid out in precise grids. Gone are the monumental stone buildings with their distinctive red-tiled roofs, the sprawling forums, and the communal bathhouses. Instead, this village feels far more organic, almost grown from the earth itself. Its predominantly round or rectangular houses are arranged not in formal lines, but in fluid, familial groupings, often surrounding a small shared courtyard. Most of these homes are simple affairs, wooden frames, their walls intricately woven with wattle, a lattice of flexible sticks and branches, then thickly daubed with a plaster-like mixture of mud, straw, and even animal dung for insulation. The roofs are expertly thatched with dense layers of reeds or straw, providing both warmth and shelter, and at their apex, a single opening allows the smoke from the central hearth inside to lazily escape into the sky. These homes are not partitioned into separate rooms, unlike the compartmentalized dwellings of your own time. Instead, each house is essentially one large communal space where the entire family lives, cooks, shares meals, and sleeps together. "Come, come," Caddick urges, his eyes twinkling, beckoning you toward one of the slightly larger houses situated near the village's heart. "Let us see if Branwen has any of her morning bread to share. It's the best in the valley, I'd wager." Stepping inside the house, you are enveloped by an immediate wave of warmth and a rich, inviting fragrance of baking bread. The floor is simply packed earth, smoothed firm by generations of footsteps. In the very center, a small, vibrant fire burns steadily within a stone-lined pit. Smoke, blue and wispy, spirals upwards with a gentle, hypnotic grace, eventually finding its way through the smoke hole in the thatched roof. Around the walls, simple wooden benches, sturdy and unadorned, are arranged, interspersed with rough-hewn shelves displaying pottery containers of various sizes, wooden bowls, and a selection of utilitarian tools. A woman with streaks of gray woven into her long, thick braid looks up from where she is meticulously tending the fire. "This is Branwen," Caddick introduces, his voice imbued with deep respect. "The village's most revered healer and midwife." Her eyes, crinkling at the corners with a genuine welcoming warmth, meet Caddick's gaze, and then yours. She gestures gracefully for both of you to take a seat on the benches nearest the crackling fire. "Breaking your fast, are you?" she asks, her voice soft but clear, as she deftly pulls a flat, round loaf from the very edge of the hearth, its crust golden and fragrant. She breaks it into several pieces, offering you a warm, fragrant chunk. It's coarser, rougher in texture than the refined wheat bread you might be accustomed to, made instead from heartier barley. Yet in this moment, infused with the warmth of the fire and shared hospitality, it is utterly delicious, especially when she drizzles a thin stream of golden honey over it from a small, unglazed pottery jar. "Our visitor has come from far away," Caddick informs Branwen, who nods slowly, as if the arrival of strangers from distant times and places is not entirely unusual, merely another thread in the rich tapestry of life. "Then you'll be wanting to know how we live," she says, settling gracefully beside you on the bench. Her tone is one of quiet pride. "It's simple, but it is good, our life here. We cultivate our barley and our vegetables. We raise our sheep for their wool and their meat, and keep a small herd of cattle for milk and labor. The forest, too, is generous, providing us with game, honey from the wild bees, and a bounty of berries and nuts in their proper seasons. You observe her attire, a simple woolen dress, dyed a deep earthy blue, with a practical cloak pinned at the shoulder by a plain bronze brooch. Around her neck, a leather cord supports a small, unadorned cross, clear evidence that Christianity, a legacy of the Roman years, has taken firm root in Britain, even in this remote village. The old ways and the new flow together, like streams joining a great river, she muses, noticing your subtle glance at her cross. Some follow the Christ, some honor the old gods of our ancestors, and many, to be safe, do a bit of both. Her words perfectly encapsulate the spiritual tapestry of this transitional era. As you finish your bread, more villagers begin to arrive, drawn by curiosity about the newcomer. They are dressed similarly to Branwen, the men in practical tunics and breeches, the women in long, flowing dresses. Their clothes are crafted from sturdy wool or linen, often dyed with the muted yet beautiful natural colors extracted from plants. Soft blues, greens, yellows, and earthy reds. Most wear leather shoes or boots, practical for the uneven terrain, though many of the children run barefoot, their soles hardened by constant contact with the earth. A young man, lean and strong, introduces himself as Garand. He tells you proudly about his work as a blacksmith, his hands calloused and stained by charcoal and iron. I learned from my father, who learned from his, he explains, his voice resonating with ancestral pride. The skill of working iron is precious, a legacy. We can no longer forge the exquisite, intricate things the Romans once brought, but I can still forge a good blade, strong and true, or mend a broken plow to keep our fields working. You observe that despite the physical departure of the Romans, their indelible influence lingers like a faint, persistent scent. Some villagers intersperse Latin words seamlessly with their native British Celtic language, a testament to centuries of linguistic mingling. The pottery, though undeniably cruder and less refined than Roman wares, still exhibits echoes of Roman styling in its forms and decorative motifs. And when Branwen meticulously treats a child's cut finger, her profound knowledge of healing herbs, you realize, stems from a potent blend of ancient traditional wisdom, passed down through generations, and fragments of Roman medical knowledge, likely gleaned from texts or practice during the occupation. As the morning progresses, you find yourself drawn into the rhythm of village life, offering a hand with daily tasks. You join a group of women, their arms strong and movements rhythmic, grinding grain between heavy round stones to produce flour, the air thick with fine dust and the scent of barley. You watch men, working in practiced, almost choreographic efficiency, repairing the thatch on a roof, their hands deftly weaving new reeds into the existing layers. Children, bright-eyed and energetic, collect eggs from the chickens that scratch and peck in the dirt between houses, while older boys, with a seriousness beyond their years, drive the sheep to fresh pasture on the surrounding hillsides. It's not always this peaceful, mind you, Caddick confides, his voice lowered as you help him mend a wooden fence, securing the perimeter of a family's small garden. That's why most of our villages are built on higher ground now, whenever possible, fortified with deep ditches and sturdy earthen banks for protection. He pauses, wiping sweat from his brow. The good news is that we can often see enemies coming from a distance. The bad news is that they still come, often and uninvited. He elaborates, his words painting a stark picture of the vulnerability that descended upon Britain after the Romans' departure. From across the eastern sea, he explains, gesturing vaguely eastward, his voice dropping to a somber whisper, come the Saxons. Tall, fierce warriors they are, with their heavy axes and long, fearsome knives. Some say that certain British leaders, desperate for aid, actually invited some of them as mercenaries, hiring them to help fight against the Picts and Scots who continually raid from the wild lands to the north. But now, his voice hardens. More and more come, not just warriors but entire families looking to settle on our lands, to claim them as their own, forever. The palpable worry in his voice is unmistakable, and you begin to understand why this tumultuous period would later be branded the Dark Ages. Not because learning or culture entirely vanished, but because the predictable, ordered Roman world had utterly dissolved, giving way to something far more uncertain, far more dangerous. But we have hope, a strong, resonant voice declares from behind you, cutting through the somber conversation. You turn, surprised, to behold a tall, powerfully built young man. His shoulders are broad, his posture erect, and his clear, intelligent eyes hold a steady, piercing gaze. He is dressed more finely than the other villagers, wearing a tunic of good, undyed cloth and a practical cloak pinned at the shoulder with a distinctive silver brooch. A sword hangs at his side, not a crude, utilitarian weapon, but one of evident fine craftsmanship, its hilt intricate, its blade gleaming dully. "This is Bedwyr," Caddoc says, his voice tinged with obvious respect and a hint of pride. "He rides with the war band of our king." Bedwyr nods in greeting, a subtle inclination of his head. "I've come to bring news," he announces, his voice carrying easily to the gathering villagers. "Our lord has won a great victory against the Saxon raiders near Bryn Hill. Their ships have been driven back to the sea, scattering in disarray." A collective cheer, loud and heartfelt, rises from the villagers. You feel their profound relief like a physical wave washing over you, palpable and deep. Bryn Hill. The name resonates, stirring a faint bell in your memory. It is, you recall, one of the precious few historical events tantalizingly associated with the legendary King Arthur in later Chronicles. "Is your lord?" you begin to ask Bedwyr, your curiosity piqued. But he is already moving purposefully toward Branwen's house, where it seems a more formal council of village elders will convene to hear his news in greater, more strategic detail. "Come," Caddoc says, gently guiding you to follow. "You should hear this too. It is important." Inside Branwen's house, additional benches have been brought in, transforming the communal living space into an impromptu council chamber. The most influential members of the village gather. The formidable blacksmith, a weathered farmer whose hands are thick with calluses, an elderly woman whose intricately patterned cloak pin-marks her as someone of considerable status and wisdom, and several other respected figures. You and Caddoc find places at the very edge of the circle, where you can observe without intruding. Bedwyr stands in the center of the room, the flickering firelight from the hearth casting dramatic, dancing shadows across his resolute face as he speaks. "Our lord, the Bear of Britain," he proclaims, his voice ringing with conviction. "The Dux Bellorum, the leader of battles, has proven again why the tribes chose him as High King." A tingle of excitement courses through you. The Bear of Britain. In Latin, you realize, that would be Arctus or Artorius, names that, through the shifting sands of time and countless retellings, could so easily evolve into the familiar Arthur. "The Saxons came with 30 ships," Bedwyr continues, his narrative painting a vivid picture of the recent conflict. "Landing near the old Roman fort at Portus Aderni, they burned 3 of our villages before our lord could gather his war band. But gather he did, calling upon warriors from many tribes, the Dumnoni, the Cornovi, the Dobuni, and more. He brought them together, swift as the hawk." As Bedwyr speaks, you can almost visualize the battle unfolding in your mind's eye. Not the romanticized, polished version from later medieval tales, but something far grittier, more raw and real. Warriors in practical iron helmets and sturdy leather armor, carrying long, ash-hafted spears, heavy swords, and round wooden shields. These are not shining knights on majestic destriers, but fierce, determined fighters, either mounted on tough, wiry ponies or on foot, advancing in tight, disciplined formations. Our Lord led the charge himself, Bedwyr recounts, his voice swelling with unconcealed pride. His sword flashed like lightning in the rain, a beacon in the storm of battle. The Saxons broke before him, their courage failing, and those who could fled in terror back to their ships, leaving many of their fallen behind. You notice how Bedwyr, throughout his report, never actually speaks the name of this powerful lord, this Bear of Britain. Perhaps the name Arthur emerged later, a title of respect rather than a given name. Or perhaps it was a title, a designation of his leadership role. Historians have long debated whether Arthur was a single historical person, a composite of several valiant leaders, or purely a myth born of desperate hope. But in this moment, in this humble village, the people gathered here clearly believe implicitly in their protector, their Dux Bellorum. After the formal news has been delivered, the meeting breaks up into smaller, more intimate conversations. You listen intently as Bedwyr patiently answers a flurry of questions from the eager villagers. Yes, he confirms. Their lord's fortress at Cadbury is being strengthened with new earthworks, deeper ditches, and taller ramparts. No, he clarifies. The Saxon leader, the one they call Ella, has not been captured, but has retreated to his settlements far in the east, licking his wounds. Yes, he reassures them. Warriors from loyal villages would be most welcome to join the High King's war band, especially those who possess their own weapons and horses, for every able body strengthens our defense. As evening begins to descend, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the village prepares for a modest but joyful feast to celebrate the good news. A pair of plump geese, their skin glistening, rotate slowly on spits over the communal fire pit in the village center, their savory aroma wafting tantalizingly on the cool air. Women bring out more loaves of barley bread, sturdy wooden bowls filled with peas pottage, a thick, nourishing soup made from dried peas and various root vegetables, and large earthenware crocks brimming with ale, brewed from fermented barley. The ale, served in simple wooden cups or sturdy pottery mugs, is weaker, milder than modern beer. Yet it is a valuable source of calories and nutrients for hard-working people, and infinitely safer to drink than water from streams that might be contaminated. The feast, by modern standards, is undeniably simple. But to these villagers, it is a truly joyous occasion, a moment of respite and shared triumph in uncertain times. As darkness finally claims the sky, someone produces a small harp, its strings singing a quiet melody, and songs begin. Some are sung in the melodic British Celtic language, others in the more formal Latin, a lingering testament to Rome. The songs tell of brave deeds in battle, of the grand old Roman days, of the Christian saints who brought their faith to Britain, and of the ancient gods of hill and stream, who some still honor in secret, beneath the watchful eyes of the stars. At one point, Bedwyr sits beside you, his voice low and contemplative, almost a murmur against the backdrop of songs and chatter. "You're not from any tribe I know," he observes, studying your face with a thoughtful intensity. "Your speech is strange, your manner different. Yet Caddoc vouches for you, and he is a wise man, a true elder." You seize the opportunity, delicately asking him more about his lord, this compelling figure who could well be the historical Arthur, trying carefully not to seem too eager or too knowledgeable about a future where this leader would transcend history to become the stuff of enduring legend. My lord is a man of both worlds, Bedwyr says, his gaze distant, as if reflecting on a complex truth. His grandfather was Roman, a commander of cavalry on the northern frontier. His mother's people, though, were of the old royal line of the Dobuni tribe, steeped in our ancient ways. He was educated by Christian monks, learned their texts and their wisdom. But he honors the old ways too, the traditions of our land. He describes a leader who has, through sheer force of will, diplomacy, and martial prowess, united many of the disparate British tribes under his banner, forging a fragile but potent alliance to stand firm against the relentless Saxon incursions. He's not a king in the old sense, Bedwyr clarifies, not one who claims power through blood alone, inherited right. No, the tribal leaders in council chose him for his profound wisdom in council and his unwavering courage in battle. He takes advice from many quarters, from his experienced warriors, from Christian priests, and even from the old druids, who still quietly keep the ancient knowledge, the wisdom of the earth and stars. You find yourself asking about Camelot, about a fabled round table of knights, about Merlin the wizard, the iconic elements of Arthurian legend that would develop and blossom over centuries of storytelling. Bedwyr looks genuinely puzzled by some of your questions. My lord holds his court at the old hill fort at Cadbury, he explains, describing a tangible, real place. It's a strong place, well defended, with new walls of earth and timber reinforcing the ancient ramparts that have stood for millennia. He pauses, a faint smile playing on his lips. As for a round table? He laughs softly. Our lord does insist that when the tribal leaders meet in council, they sit in a circle, so that none may claim precedence over others, so all voices are heard equally. Is that what you mean? And Merlin? Bedwyr's expression grows more serious, tinged with a hint of awe. There is a wise man who advises my lord. Myrddin, he is called. Some say he is a Christian monk who studied in Rome, learned their histories and their sciences. Others whisper he is one of the old druids, a keeper of ancient secrets. He knows the stars. He knows the healing plants. He remembers the old histories and the bloodlines of the tribes, back to the first Britons. A wizard? He shrugs, a practical gesture. The Christ priests would call such talk sinful, or worse. As the evening deepens, the celebration grows quieter, more subdued. Children have long since fallen asleep on their parents' laps, cradled in the warmth of shared community. The communal fire burns lower, its embers glowing a deep, reassuring red. Caddoc eventually finds you and, with a gentle touch, leads you to his own small, unassuming house at the edge of the village. You can sleep here tonight, he says, showing you to a simple pallet of straw, surprisingly comfortable, covered with thick woolen blankets. Tomorrow, if you wish, you can go with Bedwyr when he returns to our Lord's fortress. Perhaps you'll find more answers there, to the questions I see burning in your eyes. As you settle onto the surprisingly comfortable bed, listening to the soft, rhythmic night sounds of the village, a dog barking in the distant quiet, the gentle lowing of cattle, the almost imperceptible whisper of wind in the thatch, you reflect on all you've learned. This dark age Britain is both hauntingly familiar and profoundly strange. The people here share the same fundamental hopes and fears as people in any time. They desire safety, enough food to sustain their families, a meaningful life, and a future for their children. Yet, they live in a world where the old Roman certainties have crumbled into dust, where new, fierce threats and daunting new possibilities swirl like the morning mist in the valleys. The legend of King Arthur, you realize, would grow organically from this very soil, from real battles fought fiercely against Saxon invaders, from the intricate, often turbulent mixture of Roman and Celtic cultures, from the unique blend of nascent Christianity and older, resilient pagan beliefs. Later storytellers, with the passage of centuries, would embellish these stories, adding the gleam of shining armor, the courtly romance of chivalry, the magic of enchanted swords, and the spiritual quest for the Holy Grail. But here, in this humble village, on this particular night, you have glimpsed something of the raw, historical reality that might well lie behind the enduring myth. As sleep, a gentle tide, begins to claim you, your last conscious thought is of what tomorrow might bring, what further discoveries await you at the fortress of the Bear of Britain. The woolen blanket is warm, the night sounds soothing, and your final drifting realization is this: even in these so-called dark ages, there are still plenty of brave, resilient lights burning brightly against the encroaching shadows. You awaken to the soft, stirring sounds of the village gradually coming to life. The gentle lowing of cattle in a nearby pen, the distant rhythmic ring of the blacksmith's hammer, and the low murmur of voices as people begin their day's work. Sunlight, a pale, dusty beam, filters through the small smoke hole in Caddick's thatched roof, illuminating motes dancing in the cool air above the packed earth floor. For a fleeting moment, you feel suspended between dreams and reality, between your own time and this ancient, compelling world of Dark Age Britain. Caddick is already awake, stooped over the central hearth, efficiently stoking a small fire. "Good morning," he greets you, noticing your awakening. "Bedwyr plans to leave for our Lord's fortress after breaking fast. If you still wish to go with him, best rise and prepare yourself." Outside, the morning air is exquisitely crisp and clean, possessing a purity you realize you've never experienced before. Without factories, cars, or power plants, the sky above is a deeper, more vibrant blue than you've ever seen, and the refreshing sense of wood smoke, damp earth, and growing things fill your lungs with each breath. You fully grasp that in this world, people instinctively rise and sleep with the sun. There are no electric lights to artificially extend the day, no rigid clocks to regiment time beyond the ancient, natural rhythms of daylight and darkness. At the village center, people are gathering, sharing a simple morning meal of leftover barley bread, some early berries, and a thin, warming porridge made from the same staple grain. Bedwyr is there, engaged in conversation with a young man who appears to be making preparations to join him on the journey. "Ah, our visitor," Bedwyr says, nodding to you, his eyes holding a direct, assessing gaze. "Caddick says you wish to travel with me to my lord's stronghold." "Good. We welcome those who come in peace and who bring news, even from distant places." He introduces the young man beside him as Gane, a name that sends a subtle tingle of recognition through you. Could this be the early origin of the legendary Sir Gawain of later Arthurian tales? This Gane, however, is no knight in shining armor. He is a sturdy youth, perhaps 18 years old, dressed in simple woolen clothes, with a short, practical sword at his hip and a round wooden shield slung across his back. "Gane has decided to join our Lord's warband," Bedwyr explains, a hint of approval in his voice. "His father was a warrior before him, and the boy has skill with blade and spear. He will be a good addition." Soon, you are ready to depart. The villagers gather to bid a heartfelt farewell, with Branwen pressing a small cloth pouch of dried herbs into your hands. "For strength on the journey," she says with a warm, solicitous smile. Caddick clasps your forearm in the firm, reassuring grip of a warrior, a gesture common in these times. "Perhaps our paths will cross again," he says, his gaze steady. "May your god or gods watch over you until then." Your journey begins on foot, following old trackways, faint paths worn smooth by generations of travelers that wind through shallow valleys and ancient forests. "We'll meet horses at the next village," Bedwyr explains, his stride long and unhurried. My lord keeps mounts stationed at friendly settlements for his messengers and for quicker travel when needed. As you walk, the landscape of 5th century Britain unfolds around you, a panorama both familiar and profoundly strange. The rolling hills, the dense woodlands, the verdant meadows, they occupy the same geographical locations they will in your own time, but their character is entirely different. The forests are deeper, far more extensive, cloaking much of the land that will later be cleared for agriculture. These are ancient woodlands, primeval groves of towering oak, graceful ash, slender birch, and dense hazel, teeming with life. Deer, wild boar, the occasional wolf, and countless birds, their calls echoing through the canopy. The forest gives us much, Bedwyr remarks, noticing your attentive gaze sweeping across the shadowed woods. Wood for our houses and our fires, game for our tables, honey from the wild bees, nuts and berries in their seasons. The monks say their God made the forest for man's use, but the old wisdom teaches that we are part of it, not its masters. We must respect it. You pass occasional fields where farmers tirelessly work the land with simple, robust tools. Wooden plows, sometimes tipped with a precious iron share, pulled by strong oxen. Rough wooden rakes and hoes, and simple sickles for harvesting grain. The fields are small by modern standards, often irregular in shape, typically surrounded by low earthen banks or rough stone walls. The good lands near the villages are worked in common, young Gane explains, his voice surprisingly mature. Each family has their strip to tend, but all help with the plowing and harvesting, for the bounty benefits us all. You notice that the crops are diverse, different from the monoculture of modern farms. There's barley and some wheat, but also spelt, rye, and oats, testament to a more varied and resilient agricultural practice. Between the planted fields are open areas where livestock graze, mostly sheep, smaller than modern breeds, and some cattle. Around midday, you stop by a clear, cold stream to rest and eat some of the provisions Branwen thoughtfully packed: hard bread, strips of dried meat, and a small clay pot of sweet honey. As you eat, Bedwyr points out various plants growing along the stream bank. That one there, water mint, he says, indicating a patch of fragrant leaves, is good for stomach ailments. He points to another with delicate white flowers. And that one, meadowsweet, our healers use it for fevers and aches. My lord's advisor, Myrddin, knows all the plants and their uses. Some call him a magician for his knowledge, but he says it's just the old wisdom, passed down through generations. This mention of Myrddin, the historical figure who might have inspired the legendary Merlin, truly piques your curiosity. You ask Bedwyr more about him. Myrddin was born to the north, among the Votadini tribe, Bedwyr recounts. His mother was a wise woman, a keeper of local knowledge, and his father a bard who knew all the old stories, the lineage of heroes. When the Christ priests came to their village, Myrddin learned their wisdom too, their writing, their knowledge of distant lands. Some say he even studied in the great library at Ibericum before the Saxons took the city and scattered its treasures. This fascinating blend of ancient Druidic knowledge and burgeoning Christian learning, you realize, might well explain how the historical Myrddin evolved into the wizardly Merlin of later legends. In this transitional period, the old Celtic wisdom was merging, often seamlessly, with Christian teachings, creating a unique and potent cultural blend. As the day progresses, you arrive at a larger village where horses await, tethered patiently in a small corral. These are not the massive, heavy destriers of later medieval knight stories, but smaller, hardier mounts, similar in stature and build to modern ponies. They are sure-footed and tough, perfectly suited to the rugged, often unforgiving terrain of 5th century Britain. Mounted now, you make significantly better time, traveling along what remains of an old Roman road. Though unmaintained for decades, crumbling in places, the Roman engineering was so remarkably sound that substantial parts of the road are still usable. A raised causeway of packed gravel and stone cutting with surprising directness across the undulating landscape. The Romans built well, Bedwyr acknowledges, his gaze sweeping over the ancient thoroughfare. Their roads, their walls, their fortresses. Much still stands, a testament to their strength. My Lord says we should learn from them, take what was good and useful in their ways, while still holding true to the best of our own traditions. As you ride, Bedwyr points out various places of interest along the route. A distant hill fort from the old days, before the Romans ever arrived. The evocative ruins of a Roman villa, now partially dismantled, its stones repurposed by villagers for their own, more humble constructions. A sacred spring, where people still leave small offerings. Christian crosses now mingling with older Celtic tokens, silent witnesses to the blending of faiths. By late afternoon, you begin to climb higher, following a ridge that offers expansive, breathtaking views of the surrounding countryside. In the far distance, you can discern what appears to be a large, distinctive hill, with clear, terraced earthworks circling its summit. Even from this distance, you can make out faint movements on those ramparts. People going about their business, guards patrolling the walls. Cadbury, Bedwyr says, his voice imbued with evident pride, gesturing towards the imposing hill. The stronghold of our Lord, the Bear of Britain. As you draw closer, you realize that what initially appeared to be a natural hill is, in fact, an ancient fort, its defenses recently strengthened and expanded. Multiple concentric rings of earthen ramparts circle the hill, creating formidable, tiered defenses. Wooden palisades, sharp-pointed and imposing, top these earthworks. And at the main entrance, substantial timber gates stand open, guarded by vigilant men with spears and round shields. This, then, might be the historical reality behind the legendary Camelot. Not a fantastical castle with soaring stone towers, but a practical, highly defensible stronghold, brilliantly combining ancient British hill fort traditions with newer Roman-influenced innovations in fortification. Approaching the gates, Bedwyr is immediately recognized. The guards, with trained precision, straighten their postures, thumping their spear butts against the ground in a crisp salute. They eye you and Gain with a flicker of curiosity, but ask no questions. Bedwyr's word is clearly sufficient to grant you entry. Inside the gates, you find yourself within a bustling, vibrant community. The hilltop is densely covered with buildings of various sizes, most constructed of timber, with wattle and daub walls and thatched roofs, but some incorporating stone salvaged from Roman ruins, a blend of the old and the new. At the very summit of the hill stands the largest structure, a great hall, smoke rising steadily from a central opening in its roof. People of all kinds move purposefully through the settlement, warriors in leather armor with swords at their sides, craftspeople carrying their tools, women with baskets of food or bundles of cloth, children running errands or playing boisterously in the open spaces. There's none of the rigid class separation that will later characterize the medieval period. This is a more egalitarian society, though still with clear, respected leadership. Bedwyr leads you to a smaller building situated near the Great Hall. "Rest here," he says. "Refresh yourselves. I must report to my lord." But with good fortune, you'll meet him at the evening meal in the hall. The building proves to be a guest house of sorts, simple but clean, with several sleeping pallets arranged along the walls and a small hearth in the center. A young boy brings water for washing and takes your cloaks. "Are you from beyond the sea?" the boy asks, his eyes wide with unbridled curiosity. "You wear strange clothes, and your speech is odd." You give him a vague answer about coming from far away, which seems to satisfy his youthful imagination. He introduces himself as Say, another name that rings bells from Arthurian legend, as Say would eventually evolve into the Sir Kay of later stories. After washing away the dust and grime of travel, you and Gain venture out to explore the stronghold. The atmosphere is one of purpose and vibrant energy. This is clearly a place where people feel hopeful, resilient, despite the uncertain times. Near the center of the settlement, you find craftspeople at work in open-air workshops. A potter's wheel spins with rhythmic precision as skilled hands shape a vessel from local clay. Nearby, a weaver works diligently at a vertical loom, creating sturdy cloth from wool dyed with plant materials. Wode for blue, madder for red, weld for yellow. A tanner stretches cured hides on frames, while a leather worker cuts and stitches the finished leather into practical shoes, belts, and pieces of armor. Our Lord encourages all skills, a voice remarks beside you. Turning, you see an older man with clear, intelligent eyes. His simple robe bears embroidered symbols that subtly blend Christian and older Celtic designs. A wooden cross hangs at his neck, but also a small leather pouch that might contain herbs or charms. "I am Myrddin," he says, studying you with evident curiosity, his gaze both penetrating and calm. "Bedwyr told me of your arrival. He says you ask many questions about our Lord and our ways." Your heart quickens. You are meeting the living version of Merlin, not a long-bearded wizard in starry robes, but a thoughtful, observant man whose knowledge bridges multiple traditions. He radiates not magical power, but a deep, quiet wisdom and an undeniable, calm authority. "Walk with me," Myrddin invites, his voice gentle, "and perhaps we can enlighten each other." As you stroll through the bustling settlement, Myrddin explains more about the community and its extraordinary leader. "Our Lord was chosen by the Council of Tribes," he clarifies, his words painting a picture of deliberate unity. "In the old days, each tribe had its own king, often warring with its neighbors. But when the Saxons began to settle our eastern shores in greater numbers, with fire and sword, the wise among us saw clearly. We must unite, or fall one by one." He describes how the man you are increasingly certain must be the historical Artorius, the Bear of Britain, united various British tribes through astute diplomacy, formidable martial prowess, and the compelling vision of a Britain that preserved the best of both its Roman and Celtic heritage. He was raised and educated by an old Roman family, Myrddin continues, his voice betraying a hint of pride. He reads both Latin and Greek, understands the military tactics of the great Roman generals, knows Roman law and administration. But his mother's blood is of the ancient royal line of the Dobuni, and he honors our tribal ways as well, speaks our tongue, respects our traditions. When you inquire about religious practices, Myrddin offers a nuanced, insightful answer. "The Christ faith has taken deep root in Britain," he acknowledges. "The Romans brought it, and many found truth and solace in its teachings. Our Lord himself was baptized as a child, but the old ways also hold profound wisdom. Respect for the land, for the turning of the seasons, for the delicate balance of all living things." A truly wise leader, he concludes, his gaze direct, honors both paths, taking what is good and true from each. This spiritual flexibility, you realize, might well explain why Arthur's court in later legends could so seamlessly incorporate both Christian elements, like the quest for the Holy Grail, and magical elements drawn from older Celtic traditions. As evening approaches, people begin gathering, a steady stream flowing toward the great hall at the summit. Cooking fires burn nearby, their smoke mingling with the savory, mouth-watering smell of roasting meat that fills the air. You follow the flow of people up to the hall's entrance, a large doorway flanked by intricately carved wooden posts. Inside, the hall is a single vast space, its timber beams dark with age and smoke. A central hearth, a long stone-lined trench, runs down the middle, its fire blazing, with smoke rising to vent through the roof opening far above. Long trestled tables and benches line the sides, accommodating many people. At the far end, a slightly raised platform holds a larger, more elaborate table, clearly reserved for the most important figures. Torches in iron brackets and small, flickering oil lamps hung from the ceiling provide a warm, dancing light as darkness falls completely outside. The hall quickly fills with people taking their places: warriors, craftspeople, visiting tribal leaders, all mingling with surprisingly little regard for rigid rank or status. This, you observe, is not yet the rigidly stratified society of the later Middle Ages. A sudden hush falls over the assembly as a group enters from a side door near the high table. At their center walks a man of medium height, but radiating an undeniable, commanding presence. He is perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair showing just touches of gray at the temples. He wears a fine tunic of deep red wool, embroidered subtly at the edges, and a practical cloak fastened by an impressive silver brooch. A sword hangs at his side, not the mythical Excalibur of legend, but clearly a weapon of exceptional craftsmanship, its hilt well worn. As this man takes his place at the center of the high table, Bedwyr appears at your side. "Come," he says, his voice urgent but low. "Our Lord wishes to meet you." Your heart pounds with a mix of anticipation and trepidation as you follow Bedwyr to the high table. The man, surely the historical Artorius, though no one has yet spoken that name, regards you with keen intelligence. "Welcome to our hall," he says, his voice accustomed to command, yet warm with genuine welcome. "Bedwyr tells me you come from distant shores, with strange tales and questions about our ways." Before you can respond properly, a commotion erupts at the hall's entrance. A warrior staggers in, blood seeping from a fresh wound in his side, his face pale with exhaustion and pain. "My lord," he gasps, struggling for breath. "Saxon ships, at least 20 of them, landing near the old Roman port. They've burned the fishing village at the river mouth and are moving inland." The hall erupts in shouts and a cacophony of questions. The leader, with an almost effortless authority, raises a single hand, and silence falls immediately, absolute and profound. "How many warriors?" he asks, his voice calm, yet radiating an undeniable urgency. "Several hundred at least," the messenger replies, clutching his side. "Led by a chief in a helm with raven wings." The leader nods thoughtfully, then, with quiet precision, begins issuing clear, concise orders. Warriors are to prepare to ride at first light. Messengers will be dispatched immediately to allied villages to gather more fighters. Supplies must be readied for the campaign. As the hall buzzes with renewed, purposeful activity, the leader turns back to you. "It seems our conversation must wait," he says, a small, weary smile touching his lips. "War calls, as it so often does in these troubled times. But join us at our table tonight, if you wish, and tomorrow, if you are truly brave, ride with us. Come see how we defend our lands against those who would take them." You are seated near the high table, alongside Myrthen, who watches the proceedings with thoughtful, discerning eyes. Servants, moving with quiet efficiency, bring food: roasted venison and pork, hearty barley bread, stewed vegetables, and small sweet cakes made with honey. The drink is mead, a sweet fermented honey beverage, and a lighter ale brewed from barley. "This is the rhythm of our days," Myrthen comments quietly, his gaze sweeping over the bustling hall. Moments of peace and creation, interrupted by the relentless call to defend what we've built. what we cherish. It has been so since the legions left. Perhaps, he sighs, it will always be so. As the meal progresses, you intently observe the interaction between the leader and his people. There is profound respect, but not the fawning, obsequious deference that will characterize relationships between lords and subjects in later medieval times. He listens to the counsel of tribal elders, of battle-hardened warriors, and even of craftspeople with equal attention, his head inclined, his expression attentive. When a dispute arises between two men over who should lead a particular warband, he settles it with a blend of wisdom and fairness, his judgment accepted without question. He has created something rare here, Myrddin says, following your gaze. Not just a warband or a tribal kingdom, but a true community, where all contribute according to their skills and all have a voice in council. The Romans had their assemblies, and the tribes had their councils. Our Lord takes the best of both traditions, weaving them into something stronger. You notice that around the high table sit representatives of different tribes and regions, some with the darker features common to the original Britons, others with lighter hair that might indicate some Roman ancestry. Men and women alike sit at the table, each apparently respected for their wisdom or particular skills. "Is that," you ask Myrddin in a low voice, "is that the origin of the Round Table?" He looks at you with renewed curiosity, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Round Table. An interesting phrase. Our Lord does insist that in council we sit in a circle, so that all may see each other's faces and speak with equal voice, without any one person dominating. In the old days, the tribal kings would argue endlessly about who should sit in the place of honor, who was closest to the leader. Our Lord says that in his council, the only place of honor is earned by wisdom and courage, not by birth alone. This pragmatic arrangement for tribal governance, fostering unity and equal counsel, it seems, would evolve over centuries of storytelling into the legendary Round Table of Arthurian romance. After the meal, warriors gather in small groups, their faces serious, preparing for tomorrow's campaign. Some sharpen blades with rhythmic scrapes of whetstones, or meticulously repair leather armor, testing its strength. Others speak in low voices, discussing tactics and recounting memories of previous battles. A few seek quiet moments with loved ones before their uncertain departure. You find yourself drawn to a small group near the edge of the settlement, where Bedwyr is instructing younger fighters, including Gain. By the light of a small, sputtering fire, he demonstrates sword techniques, moving with a practiced grace and lethal efficiency. The Saxon fights with fury and strength, he explains, his voice firm. He charges forward with his shield, a wall of wood and leather, and strikes with his long knife, the sax. But fury can be turned against itself. The disciplined warrior steps aside, lets the charge pass, then strikes true where he is exposed. He demonstrates a fluid, almost dance-like movement, stepping past Gain's enthusiastic practice lunge and tapping him lightly on the back with the flat of his wooden sword. This is not the stylized, almost theatrical combat of later medieval romances, but practical battlefield technique, honed for survival and victory. These warriors are not knights in shining armor, but pragmatic, resourceful fighters in leather and wool, carrying shields of lindenwood, spears of ash, and iron-bladed swords. As the evening grows later, people gradually begin to seek their rest, conserving strength in preparation for the early departure. You return to the guest house, where pallets have been prepared with surprisingly comfortable bedding, woolen blankets stuffed with clean straw. Though you lie down, sleep proves elusive. Tomorrow, it seems, you will witness a Dark Age battle, perhaps one of the very conflicts that would eventually be recorded in the sparse historical accounts of this period, and later expanded into the legendary battles of King Arthur. Through the smoke hole in the roof, you can see stars, brighter and more numerous than in your light-polluted modern world. They are the same stars that have watched over humanity for countless generations, silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires, to moments of greatness and terrible darkness. In this liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, between your own time and this ancient world, you reflect on what you've learned. The historical reality behind the Arthurian legends, you realize, seems both more ordinary and in many ways more remarkable than the medieval romances would suggest. No magical sword Excalibur here, no overtly wizardly spells from Myrddin, no knights in shining armor. But something, perhaps, more impressive. Real people, fighting to preserve their way of life, to build something lasting in a time of great uncertainty. As sleep finally begins to claim you, you wonder what tomorrow will bring, what you might discover on the battlefield with the fortress of the Bear of Britain. The blanket is warm, the night sounds soothing, and your last thought before drifting off is that even in these so-called dark ages, there are plenty of lights still burning brightly. You're awakened before dawn by the stirring sounds of the stronghold preparing for war. The low murmur of voices, the clink of weapons being gathered, the impatient nickering of horses. For a moment, you lie perfectly still, remembering exactly where you are. A guest house in a hill fort in 5th century Britain, on the cusp of witnessing events that might form the historical basis for the legendary Arthurian tales. Outside, the eastern sky shows just the faintest lightning, the last stubborn stars still bright overhead. The air is cool and misty, carrying the distinct scent of cook fires already lit and damp earth. People move through the pre-dawn darkness with purpose, their faces serious, but not panicked. This, you realize, is a community accustomed to threat and swift response. Bedwyr appears at the guest house door. "Our Lord says you may ride with us if you wish," he states, his voice calm and direct. "Not in the battle line, of course, but with the observers on the ridge. Few from distant lands have seen how we fight to defend our homes." You agree readily, a thrill of anticipation and curiosity coursing through you, eager to witness history unfolding before your eyes. Bedwyr nods and gestures toward a small cook fire where people are gathering to break their fast. "Eat," he advises. "We have a long ride ahead, and none can say when we'll next have leisure for food." The pre-battle meal is simple but hearty. Thick barley porridge sweetened with honey, hard bread, and strips of smoked meat. A woman moves among the warriors with a large pottery jug, pouring a thin, nourishing ale into wooden cups. This morning drink isn't for intoxication, but for calories and vital hydration, important for men about to exert themselves fully in battle. As you eat, you observe the warband preparing. These are not the knights of later medieval romance, but something more akin to the Celtic warriors of earlier times, blended with elements of Roman military discipline. Some wear practical leather armor reinforced with small metal plates. Others wear mail shirts, thousands of interlocked iron rings that offer good protection against slashing weapons. Most have iron helmets, many clearly repurposed from old Roman designs, showing the ingenuity of a people making do with what they have. Their weapons are practical and deadly. Iron-bladed spears with ash shafts, swords of various designs, small throwing javelins, and round shields made of wood covered with leather or linen. Some carry bows, though these appear to be hunting weapons pressed into military service, rather than the specialized war bows of later centuries. Looking at these Dark Age warriors, you can clearly see the foundational elements that would evolve into the heavily armored knights of later Arthurian tales. But the reality here is more pragmatic, more rooted in the stark necessities of survival. The leader, the man who might be the historical Artorius, emerges from the great hall, already dressed for battle in a mail shirt that gleams dully in the growing light. His helmet bears no crown, but is distinguished by a band of bronze around the rim, a mark of his authority. At his side hangs his sword in a leather scabbard reinforced with bronze fittings. Not the magical Excalibur of legend, but clearly a weapon of excellent craftsmanship, carefully maintained. He moves among his warriors, speaking briefly with various group leaders, checking preparations with the calm, quiet efficiency of an experienced commander. You notice how the warriors straighten when he approaches, eager for his approval, but not cowering in fear. He leads through respect, not terror. Myrddin stands nearby, watching the preparations with thoughtful, almost somber eyes. Unlike the wizardly Merlin of later stories, he wears no magical robes, but simple wool garments with some embroidered symbols. A leather satchel, worn and familiar, hangs at his side, containing herbs for healing, you guess, not magical potions. "Will you join us on the campaign?" you ask him. Myrddin nods. "I go where our Lord goes," he says, his voice soft but firm. "My knowledge of herbs can mend wounds, and sometimes my counsel aids in understanding our foes. And you," he says, turning to Bedwyr, "you'll observe from the ridge. When you confirm this," Myrddin studies you with those penetrating eyes. "Good. Watch carefully then. What you witness today is not just men fighting men. It is the meeting of different worlds, different visions for what these islands might become." Soon the warband is mounted and ready to depart, perhaps 300 warriors in total, some on horseback, others on foot. They are arranged not in rigid Roman formations, but in more fluid groups based on tribal affiliation or family bonds. These groups have trained together, fought together, and trust each other implicitly in the chaos of combat. You're provided with a sturdy pony and placed in a small group of non-combatants, a couple of tribal elders, too old to fight but valued for their counsel, a young monk who serves as a scribe, diligently noting events, and several messengers who will carry news of the battle to allied settlements. As you ride out through the gates of the stronghold, the sun peaks above the eastern horizon, burning away the last of the morning mist and revealing a landscape of rolling hills, patches of ancient forest, and small cultivated fields. The column moves at a steady pace, following old trackways that wind across the countryside. "We go to the river crossing near the old Roman port," explains one of the elders riding beside you, a weather-beaten man named Geraint, his face a mosaic of sunlines. "If the Saxons wish to move inland, they must cross there. Our Lord plans to meet them at the ford." The strategic thinking is sound. Rather than allowing the invaders to push deeper into British territory, the defenders will confront them at a natural choke point, where the Saxons' superior numbers won't be as advantageous. As you ride, Geraint shares his knowledge of the Saxons. "They come from the eastern sea," he says, pointing toward the distant coast. "Their homeland is cold and often flooded, so they seek new lands. Some were invited as mercenaries generations ago to help defend against the Picts and Scots from the north. But more came, bringing families, looking to settle." He describes the Saxon culture as different from the Romano-British, more tribal, less influenced by Roman ways. "They have their own gods, their own customs," he explains. "Some learn our ways and live peacefully alongside us, trading, mingling. But others," he gestures toward the horizon where you're headed, his voice hardening. "Others come with fire and sword, taking what they want by force, with no respect for our laws or our people." By midday, your group has covered considerable distance. The terrain has changed, becoming flatter as you approach the river valley. In the distance, you can clearly see a thin column of smoke rising, grim evidence, perhaps, Of the fishing village the messenger mentioned being burned. The war band stops to rest briefly in a sheltered valley. Food is distributed. More hard bread, dried meat, and some early summer berries gathered along the way. The warriors check their equipment one last time, speaking in low voices about the coming battle, their faces grimly determined. You notice young Gain sitting somewhat apart, his face serious and drawn as he sharpens his sword with practiced, rhythmic movements. Approaching him, you see a mixture of excitement and fear in his eyes, natural human emotions for anyone facing their first major battle. "I keep thinking of my father," Gain says, his voice barely a whisper when you sit beside him. "He died fighting the Saxons 3 summers ago. He taught me the sword from the time I could lift one. I hope," he pauses, swallowing hard, "I hope I bring honor to his memory today." Throughout the journey, you've observed how this society views warfare. It's not the romanticized, chivalric combat of later Arthurian tales, filled with glorious deeds for personal honor. But neither is it viewed as glorious in itself. Rather, it's seen as a grim necessity, a solemn duty to protect home and family, hearth and community. Warriors gain respect not for killing, but for preserving their communities through courage and skill, through resilience and sacrifice. The rest period ends all too quickly, and soon you're riding again, now with greater urgency, as scouts return with news that the Saxon force is indeed heading directly toward the river crossing. By mid-afternoon, you reach a range of low hills overlooking a broad river valley. The river itself gleams in the sunlight, a silver ribbon winding placidly through green meadows. At one point, the river widens and shallows, the ford where the confrontation will happen. On the far side of the river, you can clearly see movement. The Saxon war band emerging from a distant wood, a dark, ominous mass. Even from here you can make out their distinctive appearance. Many with long blonde hair and beards, carrying round shields painted with fearsome designs, armed with spears, long knives, the sacks that gave the Saxons their name, and throwing axes. Bedwer leads your group of observers to a position on a hilltop with a clear, unobstructed view of the ford, but well back from the potential fighting. "Stay here," he instructs, his voice firm. "You'll see all that happens, but be safe from stray arrows or flanking movements." From this vantage point, you watch as the British force deploys with impressive discipline, reflecting the leader's Roman-trained tactics. Artorius, this proto-Arthur figure, positions his warriors carefully. Spearmen form a dense shield wall near the ford, creating a bristling barrier of iron points. Behind them, sword fighters wait, poised to exploit any breach in the enemy line. On the flanks, mounted warriors prepared to sweep around and attack from the sides if opportunity presents itself. A classic cavalry maneuver. Myrddin comes to stand beside you on the hilltop, his eyes narrowed, studying the deployment with intense focus. "Our Lord learned much from the old Roman manuals of war," he comments, his voice quiet. "But he adapts their teachings to our weapons, our terrain, our enemies. That is his genius, to blend the old with the new." As the Saxon force approaches the opposite bank, you witness something unexpected. Rather than immediately attacking, the British leader rides forward with just a small honor guard and raises his hand in a gesture for parley. After some visible discussion among the Saxon leaders, one of them, a tall, imposing figure in a helm adorned with dramatic raven wings, steps forward with his own guards. The two leaders meet in the shallows of the ford, water swirling around their horses' legs. Though you're too far away to hear their words, you can see they speak for some time, gestures occasionally punctuating their intense conversation. "What are they doing?" you ask Myrddin, your voice barely a whisper. "Our Lord always offers peace before war. the advisor explains, his gaze fixed on the figures at the ford. He offers the Saxon leader land east of the river if they will settle peacefully and acknowledge his overlordship, accepting his authority. Some accept such terms. Not all Saxons come for bloodshed alone. Many seek only land for their families, a new home. After what seems an eternity of tense conversation, the two leaders turn back to their respective forces. From the continued preparations on both sides, it's clear that peace has not been achieved. The Saxon wants more than our Lord can give, Myrddin sighs softly. So now, blood must speak where words have failed. What follows is not the choreographed one-on-one combat of later Arthurian romances, but the harsh, brutal reality of Dark Age warfare. The Saxons advance across the ford in a dense, disciplined wedge formation, their shields overlapping, their voices raised in a rhythmic, guttural chant that carries clearly across the valley, a terrifying sound. The British spear wall stands firm, a bristling hedge of iron points, unyielding. From your distant vantage point, the battle unfolds like a living tapestry, terrible in its way, but also grimly fascinating as an historical moment. The initial clash sends ripples of brutal force through both formations. Men fall on both sides, and for a time, the ford's waters run red with blood. For a terrifying moment, it seems the Saxon wedge, by sheer momentum and weight of numbers, might break through the British center. But then, you see the British leader, this historical Artorius, execute a brilliant maneuver. He moves his mounted warriors in a sweeping, calculated arc to strike the Saxon formation from the flank. The maneuver works brilliantly. Caught between the impenetrable spear wall to their front and the mounted warriors attacking their exposed flank, the Saxon formation begins to crumble. Individual combats break out across the ford and on both banks, warriors grappling fiercely in the mud and shallow water, the clang of weapons carrying clearly in the afternoon air. Through it all, you can track the British leader by his distinctive helmet and the banner carried nearby. A red dragon, you realize, a powerful symbol that will feature prominently in later Arthurian legends. He fights not from a safe distance, but in the thick of the combat, his sword rising and falling with lethal grace, his shield turning aside Saxon blows. He leads from the front, Geraint says beside you, pride evident in his voice. That is why men follow him. Not because of his birth or wealth, but because he never asks others to take risks he will not take himself. The battle's tide turns decisively when the Saxon leader, he of the raven-winged helm, falls in single combat with the British commander. You can't see the precise details from this distance, but a great, exultant cry goes up from the British fighters, and the Saxon formation dissolves into a fighting retreat, scrambling back toward the distant woods. Not all the invaders flee, however. A significant group lays down their weapons and kneels in submission. This, too, is different from how later medieval tales would portray such conflicts. In the harsh realities of Dark Age survival, taking capable prisoners who might become settlers under your rule was often far more valuable than simply slaughtering enemies. As the fighting subsides, leaving the ford and its approaches littered with fallen warriors from both sides, you witness the grim aftermath of a Dark Age battle, something rarely depicted in later romantic tales. The wounded are gathered by comrades, their cries and moans echoing across the now quiet valley. Healers, including Myrddin, move among them with practiced speed, applying herbal poultices, binding wounds, sometimes performing the grim, compassionate task of ending suffering that cannot be relieved. You notice the British leader moving among his wounded men, speaking to each, clasping hands or shoulders in recognition of their sacrifice. He shows similar respect to wounded Saxon prisoners, ensuring they receive care alongside his own men. This compassion toward defeated enemies, this humane approach, might help explain how in later centuries, Artorius would be remembered not just as a successful warlord, but as an exemplar of noble kingship, a figure of justice and mercy. As evening approaches, a temporary camp is established on the British side of the ford. Fires are lit, their flames a welcome sight against the encroaching darkness, and sentries are posted against any renewed attack. The dead are gathered for burial, British warriors to be returned to their home settlements for proper rites, Saxon dead to be buried in a common grave with whatever rituals their surviving countrymen deem appropriate. You're permitted to join Myrddin as he works among the wounded, his hands deft and sure, applying his profound knowledge of herbal medicine. His methods blend practical Roman medical knowledge with older Celtic healing traditions. For pain, he uses extracts of willow bark, a natural source of the same compound found in modern aspirin. For preventing wound infection, he applies poultices of garlic, honey, and certain molds, practices that remarkably foreshadow modern antibiotic treatments. The Romans knew much of healing, Myrddin explains as he works, his voice calm amidst the suffering. But our own wise women and healers preserved older knowledge too, passed down through generations. Both traditions have value, both bring healing. You notice that while Myrddin works, he often murmurs what sound like prayers or charms, some invoking Christ as healer, others seeming older, perhaps addressed to Celtic deities of healing like Brigantia. Again, this blend of traditions characterizes the transitional, syncretic nature of Dark Age Britain. As darkness falls completely, you join a small gathering around one of the campfires. The British leader is there, his armor removed to reveal a simple tunic now stained with blood and mud. A minor wound on his forearm has been bandaged, a testament to his presence in the thick of the fight. He accepts a wooden cup of mead with a nod of thanks, his face showing the fatigue of battle, but also a quiet satisfaction at the day's outcome. Myrddin sits beside him, speaking in low, confidential tones. You catch fragments about the Saxon prisoners, arrangements for wounded warriors, plans for the next day's march back to the stronghold. This isn't mystical counsel from wizard to king, but the practical advice of an experienced advisor to a military leader. When they notice you hovering nearby, the leader gestures for you to join them. "Come, traveler," he says, his voice still weary but warm. "Sit and warm yourself. This has been a hard day, but a good one for our people." Settling beside the fire, you're struck by the man's compelling presence. He's neither the mythical figure of later romances nor a simple barbarian warlord. Instead, you see someone educated in Roman ways, but deeply connected to his British tribal roots. A pragmatic leader trying to preserve what's valuable from the past, while adapting to the harsh new realities of a post-Roman world. When you carefully ask about his background, confirming what you've heard from others, he nods. "My grandfather was a Roman officer," he explains, his gaze distant, lost in memory. "Commander of cavalry along the northern frontier. He married a woman of the Brigantes tribe, learned her tongue, loved her land. My father served Rome too, until the legions were recalled. He taught me Roman letters, Roman tactics, the discipline of their legions. But my mother was of the royal line of the Dobuni, and from her I learned the old stories, the old ways of our people." You realize you're hearing the life story of someone who might well be the historical Artorius, not the magical king of medieval romance, but a real Dark Age leader whose accomplishments would, over centuries of retelling, transform into legendary deeds. "The Saxons call me Artorius, bear killer," he continues with a small, wry smile, "because of a bear pelt I wore in my first battle against them long ago. My own people shortened it to Artos, or Arthur. Names matter little. What matters is that our people survive these dark times, hold them back, maintain something of the world we knew before. This casual comment electrifies you. Here, perhaps, is the very origin of the name Arthur, a battle title, a fearsome epithet that would eventually become inseparable from the legend. As the evening deepens, warriors gather around various fires, sharing food and drink, treating wounds, and remembering fallen comrades. You witness the communal grieving rituals of this society, not stoic silence, but an open expression of loss through shared stories, songs commemorating brave deeds, and ritual toasts to those who've fallen. They fight fiercely, but not for glory alone, Myrthen observes, following your gaze to a group of warriors singing a low, haunting melody. They fight for their families, their homes, their way of life. That is why they follow our Lord. Because he fights for the same things, not for personal power or conquest. Later, as the camp settles for the night, you find yourself unable to sleep despite the day's excitement and exhaustion. You wander to the edge of the camp, where sentries keep watch against any renewed Saxon threat. The night is clear, stars brilliantly visible in a way rarely seen in your light-polluted modern world. One of the sentries, an older warrior with a deeply scarred face, nods in acknowledgement of your presence. "Cannot sleep?" he asks, his voice gravelly. "That's common after battle, even for those who only watched." He introduces himself as Bedwyr, another name that will feature prominently in later Arthurian tales. When you ask how long he has followed the leader, he chuckles. Since he was barely more than a boy, leading his first war band against Saxon raiders. 15 years now, at least. I've seen him grow from a brave but reckless youth to the leader he is today. Bedwyr describes campaigns against various Saxon groups, battles against Pictish raiders from the north, and even conflicts with other British tribes reluctant to join the alliance. Not all our own people welcomed his vision at first, Bedwyr explains, and some tribal kings preferred their independence, even if it meant eventually falling one by one to the Saxons. His account helps you understand how this historical leader, whether named Artorius or something else, created a briefly unified British resistance against Saxon expansion, an achievement that would later be romanticized into the glorious realm of Camelot. Will we defeat them all in the end? Bedwyr muses, gazing toward the eastern horizon where Saxon settlements lie. Who can say? They are many, and more come each year. But while our Lord lives, we hold them back, maintain something of the world we knew before. This realistic assessment matches the historical record. The Saxon advance was temporarily halted in the late 5th and early 6th centuries, possibly due to British resistance under a leader like Artorius, but would eventually continue until much of what is now England fell under Saxon control. Returning to the main camp, you pass by where the leader sits in quiet conversation with Myrthen and a few other advisors. Their discussion appears serious, not just about tomorrow's return march, but longer-term strategies for defending British lands and preserving their way of life. You realize you're witnessing leadership in its most fundamental form, not the divine right of kings from later eras, but authority earned through competence, courage, and genuine care for one's people. This, perhaps more than any magical sword or mystical quest, explains why the memory of Artorius would endure through centuries. He represented the ideal of just leadership in uncertain times. As you finally settle back onto your sleeping mat, wrapped in a woolen blanket against the night's chill, your mind whirls with all you've witnessed today. You've seen the historical reality that might underlie the Arthurian legends, not knights in shining armor on noble quests, but practical fighters defending their homes. Not magical battles against fantastical foes, but the grim necessity of warfare in an age of migration and change. Not a mythical king touched by divine favor, but a skilled leader uniting diverse peoples against a common threat. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that have watched over Britain through Roman occupation, Saxon invasion, Viking raids, Norman conquest, and beyond. In the gentle rhythm of breathing from sleeping warriors nearby, in the soft crackle of banked fires, in the occasional whinny of tethered horses, you find a connection to this distant past that's more immediate and real than any romantic tale. Sleep comes at last, bringing dreams not of mythical quests and magical swords, but of the people you've met. Bedwyr, the loyal warrior. Myrddin, the wise advisor. Gane, the young fighter honoring his father's memory. And the leader himself, this possible Artorius, whose real deeds would someday transform into legend. In their faces, their words, their actions, you've glimpsed the human reality behind the myth. And somehow, that makes the story all the more powerful. Morning comes with the calls of birds and the soft movements of the camp awakening. Your sleep, despite the hard ground beneath you, was surprisingly deep, perhaps the result of yesterday's excitement and emotional exhaustion. Opening your eyes, you see the sky lightening from deep blue to the soft pink of dawn, wisps of morning mist still rising from the river where yesterday's battle was fought. The camp is already active, with warriors packing equipment, healers checking bandages on the wounded, and cooks preparing a simple morning meal. The practical efficiency of these people continues to impress you. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary ceremony, just the focused activity of a community that understands its purpose. "Good morning," says a now familiar voice. Turning, you see Myrddin approaching with 2 wooden cups of steaming liquid. He hands one to you. "An infusion of mint and honey," he explains. "It refreshes after sleep and settles the stomach before travel." The warm drink is pleasant, and as you sip it, Myrddin explains the day's plans. "We return to the stronghold by a different route," he says. "Slower, to accommodate our wounded, but it allows us to pass through several allied settlements to spread news of the victory." Indeed, you soon observe a different rhythm to this day's journey. The war band moves at a deliberate, measured pace, with wounded warriors transported on improvised stretchers carried between horses or supported on mounts led by companions. The Saxon prisoners, perhaps 30 men who surrendered during yesterday's battle, walk in a loose group, guarded, but not bound or mistreated. "What will happen to them?" you ask Bedwyr, who rides nearby. "They have sworn oaths to our Lord," he explains. "Some will be ransomed back to their people east of the river. Others, who have skills we need, smiths, carpenters, boat builders, may choose to settle in our territories, under our protection, becoming part of our communities." This pragmatic approach to former enemies reflects the fluid nature of Dark Age society, where practical alliances and the need for skilled hands often outweighed ethnic divisions. It helps explain how, over generations, Saxon and British communities would gradually integrate in some regions. As the column advances through the morning, you notice how the leaders constantly send scouts ahead and to the flanks. "The Saxons are not our only concern," Bedwyr explains when you ask about this vigilance. "Some British tribes to the west remain hostile to our Lord's authority, preferring their own kings. And always there are outlaws and bandits who prey on travelers, taking advantage of the fractured peace." By midday, your group approaches a small settlement nestled in a sheltered valley. Unlike the village you first visited, this one has more substantial defenses. A deep ditch and an earthen bank topped with a wooden palisade. The gates stand open, however, and people stream out to greet the returning warriors. News of the victory has somehow preceded you, probably carried by fast-riding messengers dispatched during the night. The welcome is joyous, with women and children running to embrace returning fighters, elders nodding in approval, and the settlement's leaders stepping forward to formally greet the man you now know might be called Artorius, the possible historical Arthur. The column halts here for several hours, allowing the wounded to rest and everyone to enjoy a proper meal. The villagers bring out their best food: freshly baked bread, roasted meats, early summer vegetables, and mead in clay cups. It's a modest feast by modern standards, but it represents significant generosity from people who live close to subsistence. During this rest period, you observe how information spreads in a society without printing or mass communication. The leader speaks formally to the village elders, providing a factual account of the battle. Meanwhile, warriors share their experiences with relatives and friends, embellishing some details while downplaying others, their stories growing in the telling. A youth with a small harp, a bard in training, you realize, moves among the groups, listening intently, occasionally asking questions. He gathers the stories, Mirthan explains, following your gaze to the young bard. He will shape them into songs and tales, to be remembered when written words are few. In time, this battle will join others in the songs of our Lord's deeds. You're witnessing, you realize, the very process through which historical events transform into legend. The first steps in the long journey from a real Dark Age battle to the mythical conflicts of later Arthurian tales. While in the village, you also observe more of the practical crafts that sustain life in this era. Women spin wool into thread using simple drop spindles, a technology unchanged for thousands of years. Others weave the thread into cloth on upright looms. Men work leather into shoes, belts, and armor, or carve wood into bowls, spoons, and tool handles. What strikes you most is how few possessions people own compared to modern times. Each item represents significant labor and is made to last, used until it wears out, then repaired if possible, and finally repurposed when repair is no longer feasible. Nothing is wasted, and craftsmanship is valued highly. A small girl approaches you shyly, holding out a small wooden doll, her most precious possession, you guess. When you admire it, her face lights up. "My father made it," she explains proudly. "He's a wood carver. He's making me a new one because I'm growing too big for this one." This simple interaction reminds you that, despite the vast differences in material culture, the emotional lives of these people, their family bonds, their pride in skills, their small joys, remain recognizably, profoundly human. As the day progresses, you witness another important aspect of Dark Age Britain, the religious practices that reflect a society in spiritual transition. The village has a small Christian chapel, a simple timber building with a cross mounted above its door. But near the edge of the settlement stands a sacred spring, surrounded by stones smoothed by age, clearly a site of worship predating Christianity. When some of the wounded are brought to this spring for its reputed healing waters, you notice how the attendants blend practices, making the sign of the cross while also leaving small offerings of food or flowers at the spring itself. No one seems troubled by this mixing of traditions. "The Christ faith grows stronger each generation," Mirthan comments, observing your interest. "The Romans brought it, and many find truth in its teachings. But the old ways knew things too. The healing powers of certain places, the turning of the seasons, the balance of all living things. A wise person honors both paths." This spiritual flexibility helps explain how elements of older Celtic beliefs, magical wells, enchanted landscapes, supernatural beings, would later intermingle with Christian elements in Arthurian legends. By mid-afternoon, your group is ready to continue the journey. The leader thanks the village elders for their hospitality, promising to send them iron tools and salt, valuable commodities in appreciation. As the column reforms, you notice that a few village youths have joined the war band, eagerly accepting the chance to travel to the main stronghold and perhaps become warriors themselves. The afternoon's journey takes you through varied landscapes, open meadows where sheep graze, patches of ancient forest, and occasionally past the ruins of Roman villas or way stations, their stones partially reclaimed by nature or repurposed for newer, simpler buildings. Many great Roman works still stand throughout our lands, Bedweir tells you, gesturing toward a crumbling archway. Roads, bridges, walls, buildings. We use what we can, but much of their knowledge has been lost. Our smiths cannot make steel of the same quality. Our masons cannot cut stone with such precision. Our potters cannot create such fine wares. This sense of living amid the remnants of a more sophisticated civilization helps explain the nostalgic quality that would later infuse Arthurian legends. The sense of a golden age lost, a civilization in decline trying to preserve what it can of former glories. As evening approaches, the column reaches another Allied settlement. This one is built directly on the foundations of an abandoned Roman fort. The square outline of the old Roman walls is still visible, though the current wooden palisade follows only part of the original perimeter. Within, Dark Age buildings, mostly timber and thatch, stand alongside the stone remains of Roman structures, a stark visual representation of the blend of eras. After another welcome and another meal, simpler this time as this settlement has less to share, you witness an evening gathering quite different from the previous night's tired camp. Now that the immediate danger has passed and the wounded are being cared for, there's time for storytelling and music. In the central space of the settlement, villagers and warriors gather around fires as darkness falls. The young bard you noticed earlier produces his harp and begins to play, his fingers drawing surprisingly complex melodies from the simple instrument. He sings in the British Celtic language, though occasionally Latin phrases appear in his verses. Myrddin translates quietly for you. He sings of past battles, of great leaders who defended our lands against invaders, Myrddin explains. He weaves our Lord's victory yesterday into the longer tale of our struggles since the legions left. You're witnessing oral history in action, the preservation and transmission of cultural memory through song and story. This tradition, you realize, would eventually preserve the memory of leaders like Artorius long after their deaths, gradually transforming historical events into the legendary tales that would become the Arthurian cycle. Later in the evening, the leader himself speaks to the gathered community, not as a remote king pronouncing edicts, but as a first among equals, sharing plans and seeking input. He describes his strategy for securing the river frontier against further Saxon incursions, calling on this settlement to provide scouts and messengers for an early warning system. We cannot match the Saxons in numbers, he acknowledges candidly. They are many, and more come each season from across the Eastern Sea. But we can outthink them, outmaneuver them, use our knowledge of the land to our advantage. His practical approach to defense, focused on realistic goals rather than grandiose visions of total victory, helps explain how British communities managed to halt the Saxon advance for a time, creating the historical circumstances that would later be romanticized as Arthur's glorious realm. When the formal meeting concludes, smaller groups form around the fires. You find yourself seated with Myrddin, young Gain, sporting a bandaged arm from yesterday's battle, and several local elders, eager for news from other regions. Their conversation reveals much about the challenges of this era, not just external threats from Saxons, Picts, and Irish raiders, but internal struggles too. Trade has diminished significantly since Roman times, making certain goods scarce. Knowledge is being lost as fewer people can read the Latin texts preserved in monastery libraries. Disputes between tribes flare up, despite the leaders' efforts at unification. It was easier in some ways under Rome, admits one gray-haired elder, shaking his head. Their laws were clear, their roads were safe, their coins were trusted everywhere. But we paid for that safety with our freedom, our traditional ways. And now we must find our own path, Mirdan responds, his voice firm. Taking what was good from Rome, but remembering who we were before they came, who we truly are. This tension between Roman and Celtic, between past and future, between different visions of Britain's destiny, would become a central theme in later Arthurian tales, expressed through conflicts between characters representing different values and traditions. As the evening progresses, you notice the leader sitting somewhat apart, deep in conversation with a travel-stained messenger who must have arrived while you were distracted. Their expressions are serious, their gestures suggesting disagreement or concern. "Trouble?" you ask Mirdan quietly. "Always," he sighs, a weary but resigned sound. News from the northern territory suggests the Pictish tribes are raiding again across the old Roman wall, seeking plunder, and some of our own chieftains in the western highlands grow restless under our lord's authority, preferring their independence. This constant pressure from multiple directions, Saxons from the east, Picts from the north, internal divisions among the British themselves, helps explain why any unification achieved by a leader like Artorius would prove temporary. The historical reality was more complex than later legends would suggest, with no simple division between good and evil, no clear path to lasting victory. As people begin to seek their sleeping places for the night, you witness a small, tender moment that humanizes these historical figures. The leader, despite his obvious fatigue, takes time to visit each of his seriously wounded men, speaking quietly with them, clasping hands or touching shoulders in reassurance. You see how his warriors look at him with genuine devotion, not forced deference. "He remembers every name," Bedwyr says, appearing beside you. "Knows their families, their villages, their skills and hopes. That is rare in a great leader. This human connection, this compassionate leadership, might explain why the memory of a Dark Age warlord would persist and evolve into the noble King Arthur of later legends. Not just his military successes, but his character as a leader who cared for his people. Finding your assigned sleeping place in a simple guest house, you settle onto a straw-filled mattress, pulling a woolen blanket against the night's chill. Through the smoke hole in the roof, stars are visible. The same constellations that these people know by different names, that guide their planting and harvesting, that feature in their stories of gods and heroes. Sleep comes more easily tonight, but brings vivid dreams. Fragments of all you've witnessed, merging with images from Arthurian legends you've known since childhood. In your dreams, the practical Dark Age warrior Artorius transforms gradually into the mythical King Arthur, his leather armor becoming shining plate mail, his hill fort evolving into the fantastic towers of Camelot. You see how, over centuries of retelling, historical events could take on magical qualities, how real people could become larger than life. You wake briefly in the deepest part of the night, the settlement silent around you except for the soft tread of night sentries and the occasional call of an owl. In this quiet moment between sleep and wakefulness, you reflect on what you've learned about the possible historical roots of the Arthurian legends. The real Dark Age Britain was harsher, more pragmatic than later romantic tales would suggest. A society fighting for survival amid the collapse of Roman order, the pressure of Germanic migration, and climate changes affecting agriculture and settlement patterns. Yet within this challenging reality, you've witnessed courage, wisdom, compassion, and community. The human qualities that would eventually be idealized in the Arthurian tradition. As sleep reclaims you, your last conscious thought is anticipation of tomorrow's arrival at the main stronghold, and what final insights you might gain about the historical reality behind one of the world's most enduring legends. Morning begins early again, the camp stirring before full daylight. After a simple breakfast, the column forms for the final leg of the journey, back to the hill fort stronghold that might be the historical kernel of legendary Camelot. Riding beside Bedwyr as the sun climbs higher, you ask him about the leader's background, hoping to understand more about how a real Dark Age warrior could evolve in cultural memory to become the mythical King Arthur. His father was a war leader before him, Bedwyr explains, his voice imbued with respect. Commanding cavalry for the last Roman governors, then leading our defense after the legions withdrew. He taught our Lord Roman tactics, Roman ideas of law and governance, the discipline of their legions. But his mother was of the old royal line of the Dubuni tribe, a keeper of the ancient stories and customs. Our Lord draws strength from both traditions, weaving them together. This dual heritage, Roman and Celtic, would become a defining characteristic of the Arthur figure in later legends, representing the blending of different cultural influences in post-Roman Britain. As you ride through the morning, you pass small farms and hamlets where people pause in their work to raise hands in greeting to the returning war band. You notice how the land is worked. Fields divided into strips, plowed with simple tools drawn by oxen, planted with barley, wheat, oats, and vegetables. It's subsistence farming for the most part, each community producing what it needs with little surplus for trade. Near midday, you crest a hill and see in the distance the distinctive outline of the stronghold. The concentric rings of earthworks circling the hill, the wooden palisades, the great hall at the summit. After days of travel and battle, the sight clearly lifts the spirits of the returning warriors. The final approach to the stronghold is marked by ceremony. Sentries on the outer walls spot the column and sound horns to alert the community. People stream from the gates to welcome the returning fighters. And as you enter the settlement, you're swept into a scene of joyous reunion. Families embrace returning warriors. Children dart between adults excitedly asking about the battle. Elders nod in approval at the news of victory. The wounded are gently helped toward the healing houses, while the Saxon prisoners are led to quarters where they'll be housed until their fate is decided. Through it all, you observe the leader, the man called Artorius, the possible historical Arthur, moving among his people with natural authority, tempered by genuine connection. He isn't set apart by elaborate trappings of royalty or treated with fawning deference. His leadership seems based on earned respect rather than inherited privilege. As the initial excitement of the return subsides, practical matters take precedence. A council is called in the Great Hall to discuss the implications of the battle, the disposition of the Saxon prisoners, and strategies for securing the frontier. You're invited to attend, perhaps as a courtesy to a guest who has shared in the campaign's dangers. Inside the Great Hall, a large fire burns in the central hearth, smoke rising to vent through the hole in the thatched roof. The leader sits not on an elaborate throne, but on a simple wooden chair, slightly elevated on a small platform. Around him gather representatives of different communities and interests, tribal elders, war leaders, craft masters, and a few women whose bearing suggests they hold positions of respect and authority. This gathering, you realize, might be the historical seed from which the legendary Round Table would grow. Not a formal order of knights, but a council where different perspectives were heard and valued. The discussions are practical and direct. Reports are given about Saxon movements in other areas. Supplies are allocated for rebuilding the burned village near the river. Arrangements are made for integrating those Saxon prisoners who wish to settle under British authority. Throughout, you notice how decision-making is neither wholly democratic nor strictly hierarchical. The leader clearly has final authority, but seeks consensus when possible, listening to contrary views with genuine consideration. This balance of strong leadership with collaborative governance might explain why the Arthur figure would later be remembered as both a powerful king and the head of a fellowship of equals. As the council concludes, with tasks assigned and plans agreed upon, you find yourself reflecting on what you've witnessed during your time in this Dark Age world. Behind the romantic Arthurian legends of later centuries, you've glimpsed a more complex and, in some ways, more compelling reality. A society in transition, fighting for survival while trying to preserve what was valuable from its dual Roman and Celtic heritage. The real achievement of leaders like the historical Artorius wasn't establishing a fantastic realm of chivalry and magic, but something perhaps more impressive: holding together a fragmenting world, preserving knowledge and culture that might otherwise have been lost, and giving their communities a chance to adapt and survive through extraordinarily challenging times. This, you think, is the true once and future king. Not a mythical figure who would someday return from Avalon, but the enduring human capacity for courageous, compassionate leadership in times of great uncertainty. That legacy lives not in magical swords or fantastic quests, but in the ordinary courage of people facing change and challenge with determination and hope. After the council disperses, you find yourself with an unexpected invitation. Myrddin approaches, his manner warm but somehow more formal than before. "Our Lord wishes to speak with you privately," he says. "He has questions about your homeland, your journey, your purpose here." You follow Myrddin to a smaller building adjacent to the Great Hall, perhaps the leader's private quarters. Unlike the communal spaces you've seen so far, this room shows evidence of more personal use. A simple wooden table holds scrolls and writing implements, evidence that literacy, while rare, hasn't vanished entirely in this post-Roman world. Herbs hang drying from the rafters, filling the air with their fragrance. A fine wool tapestry depicting a hunting scene adds both decoration and insulation to one wall. The man you've come to think of as the historical Arthur, Artorius, the Bear of Britain, sits beside a small fire, his expression thoughtful. He gestures for you to join him on a bench while Myrddin remains standing nearby. For a moment, none of you speak. The only sound, the gentle crackling of the fire and distant voices from outside. "You have traveled with us, watched us fight, listened to our counsels," the leader finally says, his voice deep and measured. "Yet you remain a mystery, stranger. You dress differently, speak differently, know things you should not know, and ask questions about matters few would think to question." His tone isn't accusatory, but curious, even respectful. This isn't an interrogation, but an invitation to share, leader to leader, across a gulf of understanding that feels wider than just culture or language. With careful words, mindful of not disrupting history more than your presence already has, you explain that you come from a distant time, drawn by curiosity about this pivotal age when the old Roman order was fading and something new was taking shape. You mention that in your time, stories are told of a great leader who united the Britons against Saxon invaders. Stories that have grown and changed over centuries. Rather than dismissing this fantastic claim, Artorius listens with surprising openness. Perhaps in an age where boundaries between natural and supernatural remain fluid, where Christian miracles and older magical beliefs coexist, the idea of a traveler from the future isn't entirely implausible. "And these stories of this leader?" he asks finally, his gaze piercing. "What do they say of him? What manner of man do they claim he was? You hesitate, wondering how much to reveal. Finally, you speak of a just king who united warring factions, who fought to preserve civilization against barbarian threats, who gathered the best and bravest around him in common purpose. You mention a magical sword, a mystical advisor, knights on quests for sacred objects, keeping descriptions general enough that he might not recognize himself directly in these legends. Artorius listens intently, occasionally exchanging glances with Myrthen. When you finish, he is silent for a long moment, gazing into the fire. Stories change in the telling, he says finally, his voice calm. Deeds grow greater, men become more than men. The everyday transforms into the miraculous. It is the way of things. Myrthen nods in agreement. The bards must make their songs memorable, their tales compelling. Few would gather to hear of the mundane struggles we face, the broken harvest tools, the leaking roof thatch, the endless diplomacy with quarrelsome chieftains. So the sword becomes magical, the victory more complete, the leader more perfect than any mortal man could be. There's no bitterness in their acceptance of how history becomes legend. Only a pragmatic understanding of how memory and storytelling work. They seem to recognize that the transformation of truth into myth serves a purpose, preserving core values and aspirations, even as factual details blur. What matters, Artorius continues, his voice gaining strength, is not whether future generations remember my name correctly, or the exact battles I fought, or the true nature of my counsels. What matters is that they remember the struggle itself, to preserve knowledge, to maintain justice, to build community in broken times. His wisdom strikes you deeply. This man, whether the historical Arthur or not, understands that his personal legacy is less important than the values he embodies. The effort to protect civilization when its future hangs in the balance. Your conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a young boy, the same Say you met earlier, who might be the colonel of the later Sir Kay character. He brings word that the evening meal is being prepared, and that visitors have arrived from a western settlement bringing gifts and news. Artorius rises, the private moment giving way to public duties. Before you leave, however, he makes an unexpected offer. Remain with us for the turning of the moon, if you wish. Learn our ways more deeply. When you return to your own time, speak truly of what you have seen. Not just our battles and councils, but our everyday lives, our hopes, our struggles, large and small. With that invitation, you're released back into the bustling life of the stronghold. The remainder of the day passes in a whirl of activity as the community prepares for evening feasting and the reception of the new visitors. You observe how even celebrations require practical work. Food must be prepared, the great hall arranged, appropriate gifts gathered to reciprocate those brought by the visitors. As twilight approaches, you find yourself helping a group of women preparing bread for the feast. They've incorporated you into their work without fuss, showing you how to knead the coarse dough made from locally grown barley and spelt. Their conversation flows around you, discussions of children and households mixed with astute observations about tribal politics and community needs. You realize that women in this society, while occupying different roles from men, hold significant influence. They manage households, practice healing arts, preserve cultural knowledge through stories and songs, and often oversee food production, arguably the most crucial aspect of survival. Some, like Branwen from the village where you first arrived, serve as respected community leaders and advisors. This more balanced gender dynamic helps explain why women in Arthurian legends, Guinevere, Morgan Le Fay, the Lady of the Lake, would play such significant roles, unlike the often marginalized female characters in other medieval tales. The evening's feast brings together the entire stronghold community. The great hall blazes with light from torches and the central hearth. People arrange themselves on benches along trestle tables, with a main table at the elevated end occupied by Artorius, his chief warriors, Myrddin, and the visitors from the western settlement. These visitors bring interesting news. They speak of trading ships from across the Western Sea, from Hibernia, Ireland, and even further, from the lands the Romans called Hispania. Despite the disruption of Roman trade networks, some maritime commerce continues, bringing occasional luxuries and news from distant shores. The world has not ended with Rome's retreat. Myrddin comments when you express surprise at this continued connection to distant lands. It has changed, yes, grown smaller in some ways, more fragmented, but people still travel, still trade, still seek new horizons. This perspective challenges the common modern view of the Dark Ages as a time of complete isolation and cultural regression. While certainly more limited than during the height of Roman power, connections remained, preserving threads of commerce and communication that would eventually strengthen again in later centuries. As the meal progresses, the formal business of the gathering takes place. The Western visitors have come seeking judgment in a dispute between neighboring communities over grazing rights. Artorius listens to both sides, asks penetrating questions, and finally proposes a solution that draws on both Roman legal principles and older tribal customs. You're struck by how justice functions in this society, not through written codes and professional courts, but through the wisdom of respected leaders, applying practical solutions to maintain community peace. Yet there's structure to the process, combining elements of Roman judicial procedure with Celtic tribal traditions. After the formal business concludes, the evening turns to entertainment. A bard from the western settlement performs, his harp skills clearly respected even in this martial community. He sings tales of heroes from the distant past, figures from Celtic mythology like Cuchulainn and Bran the Blessed, but also more recent stories, including accounts of Roman generals who defended Britain against earlier invasions. Most interestingly, he performs a new composition about yesterday's battle at the river crossing. Already you notice how the actual events you witnessed are being shaped into more dramatic narrative. The leader's combat with the Saxon chief, described in more elaborate detail. The victory more complete. The Saxon retreat more decisive than what actually occurred. And so it begins, Myrddin murmurs beside you. The transformation from deed to legend, from man to myth. In 3 generations, this song will describe magical swords and divine intervention. His tone holds no criticism, only acceptance of the way human memory works. Stories must be memorable to survive, and each retelling inevitably reshapes events to emphasize meaning over literal accuracy. As the evening deepens and the celebration continues, you notice how different aspects of this society's heritage blend together. In one corner, children play a board game clearly derived from the Roman ludus latrunculorum, a strategy game similar to chess. Nearby, warriors exchange boasts and arm wrestling challenges in a fashion that would have been familiar to their Celtic ancestors centuries before Rome's arrival. The food similarly reflects this cultural blend. Dishes combining Roman culinary techniques with local ingredients, Mediterranean flavors adapted to British resources. Even their clothing shows this mixing of traditions. Tunics cut in Roman styles but decorated with Celtic patterns. Brooches incorporating designs from both cultures. What you're witnessing isn't the complete disappearance of Roman civilization, nor the untouched survival of pre-Roman Celtic culture, but something new emerging from the creative tension between these influences. Exactly the cultural matrix from which Arthurian legends would eventually grow. Late in the evening, when many have sought their sleeping quarters and the great hall grows quieter, Bedward joins you near the banked central hearth. His expression is thoughtful as he gazes into the glowing embers. "Myrthen tells me you may be leaving us soon," he says, "returning to your distant home." When you acknowledge this, he nods slowly. "I thought this might be so. Travelers like you seldom stay." He hesitates, then continues, his voice earnest. "Before you go, I would ask something of you. Remember us as we truly were. Not perfect heroes from songs, not savages without learning or wisdom, but people striving to preserve what matters while adapting to a world in flux." His request touches you deeply. This warrior, who might be the seed of the legendary Sir Bedivere, isn't concerned with personal glory or how his own deeds might be remembered, but with the authentic portrayal of his entire community, their struggles, their values, their humanity. "In your time," Bedwyr continues, "do people still face such challenges? The need to preserve knowledge while embracing necessary change? The struggle to build unity from diversity? The defense of community against those who would destroy rather than create?" His questions strike at the heart of human experience across all eras. You realize that despite the vast differences in material culture and specific historical circumstances, the fundamental challenges facing Bedwyr's society resonate strongly with those of your own time. These struggles never truly end, you tell him honestly. The forms change, the specific threats and opportunities evolve, but the essential human challenges remain. Rather than discouraging him, this answer seems to provide comfort. "Then perhaps our efforts here matter beyond our own time," he says, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Perhaps in facing our challenges with courage and wisdom, we speak across the centuries to those who will face their own trials." This perspective, that human struggles and triumphs form a continuous thread connecting past, present, and future, offers a deeper understanding of why Arthurian legends have remained powerful for so long. They speak to enduring human concerns, presenting not just entertainment, but wisdom about leadership, community, and purpose that transcends their specific historical context. The next several days pass in a rhythm that gives you deeper insight into everyday life in this Dark Age community. You're welcomed into various aspects of the Stronghold's activities, sometimes observing, sometimes participating as your skills allow. You join hunting parties that venture into nearby forests, learning how these people sustainably harvest game using bows, spears, and trained dogs. Their knowledge of animal behavior and woodland ecology is sophisticated, passed down through generations of practical experience. You observe agricultural work in the fields surrounding the stronghold, seeing how crops are rotated to maintain soil fertility, how weather signs are interpreted to time planting and harvesting, how communal labor tackles the most demanding tasks like grain harvesting. In the craft workshops, you watch metal workers, potters, wood carvers, and weavers practicing skills that blend Roman techniques with older Celtic traditions. Without mass production, each item is made individually by skilled hands, often decorated with personal touches that reflect the maker's creativity within traditional patterns. Children's education happens through practical apprenticeship rather than formal schooling. Young ones follow adults through daily tasks, gradually taking on more responsibility as they demonstrate readiness. Stories told around evening fires transmit cultural values, historical memory, and practical knowledge in engaging forms that lodge deeply in young minds. Beyond these practical activities, you observe the community's spiritual life. The stronghold contains both a small Christian chapel, where monks lead prayers, and a sacred grove at the eastern edge, where older rituals honor the turning of seasons and significant life transitions. Most people participate in both traditions without apparent conflict, finding different but complementary meanings in each. Throughout these days, you have occasional conversations with Artorius, Myrddin, and others about matters both practical and philosophical. You're struck by how their thinking blends pragmatism with deeper reflection. They must focus on immediate survival needs, yet they also ponder larger questions about purpose, justice, and the future beyond their own lifetimes. One evening, you find Myrddin atop the stronghold's highest point, gazing at the stars. When you join him, he points out constellations, naming them in both Latin and the older Celtic terms. His knowledge of astronomy is impressive, a blend of Roman scientific understanding and traditional Celtic star lore. The heavens remind us that patterns endure, even as individual lights are born and die, he says. So too with human knowledge, human societies. Rome has fallen from Britain, but not everything Rome brought has been lost. What matters survives, transforms, finds new expressions. This capacity to integrate different traditions, rather than seeing them as mutually exclusive, seems central to the cultural resilience of Dark Age Britain, and helps explain the hybrid nature of Arthurian legends, which would eventually incorporate elements from Roman, Celtic, Christian, and even later Norman traditions. As your time in this world nears its conclusion, you find yourself drawn to the children of the stronghold, knowing they represent the generation who will preserve and transmit the memory of these times. You sit with them during evening story sessions, watching their faces as they absorb tales of Roman generals, Celtic heroes, Christian saints, and recent victories by their own leader. A particularly bright girl of perhaps 10 years asks you for stories from your homeland. Careful not to reveal too much, you nonetheless share some simpler tales that might resonate across the centuries. She listens with intense concentration, then nods seriously. "I'll remember your stories," she promises. "I'll tell them to my children, and they to theirs." In that moment, you understand viscerally how oral tradition works, the human chain of memory stretching across generations, preserving knowledge and wisdom even without written records. It's not perfect. Details change, contexts shift, meanings evolve. But the essential core persists, binding human experience across time. On your final evening, Artorius hosts a smaller gathering in the Great Hall, just his closest advisors, key warriors, and you. The atmosphere is contemplative rather than celebratory. These people sense that you'll soon depart, and there's a desire to share final thoughts, to ensure that what matters most about their world will travel with you. An older woman named Agrain, perhaps the seed of the character who would become Arthur's mother in later legends, speaks of the importance of remembering women's contributions to their society. "It is not only through war that we survive," she says firmly, her gaze steady, "but through healing, teaching, nurturing, creating. These too are forms of courage, forms of strength, forms of preservation." A warrior named Kais, speaks of the honor code that guides their fighting. "We do not war for glory alone or for plunder," he insists. "We fight to protect what cannot protect itself, our children, our elders, our knowledge, our sacred places. A warrior without purpose, without something to defend, is merely a brigand." A profound reverence for the fallen warriors intertwined with an unshakable oath to the generations yet to come defined their resolve. It was a silent testament, often observed in the hushed moments before a dawn patrol or the somber rituals beneath the elder trees, honoring those whose lives paved their present path. Those who walked this earth before us, their spirits are not merely memories. They are the bedrock upon which we stand, a vigilant shield that protects us, he elaborated, his voice gaining a deeper resonance. Their wisdom flows through our veins. Their courage beats in our hearts, guiding our hands and steadying our steps in the face of peril. The weight of their ancestors' sacrifices was palpable, a solemn legacy that fueled their unyielding commitment. This was not just a battle for survival, but a sacred promise etched in blood and shared history. We wage this war to ensure that our children and their children will never again bow under the oppressive yoke that our forefathers knew. They will not know the gnawing hunger of stolen lands, the despair of silenced tongues, or the terror of freedom denied. We fight for a future where their laughter echoes unbound, where their knowledge flourishes, and where their sacred places are forever safe, unwounded by the brutalities of the past.